Welcome to Donu's World. Hello everyone. Thank God it's Friday again. Welcome to Donu's World. Today, I'm going to talk about my belief that single motherhood sucks. And I know there are lots of women who will agree with me, but there are also a lot of women who deliberately have children on their own, can't be bothered to include a resident male in the mix. And I can understand where they're coming from because, honestly, men can be so awful. And you really don't want to spend your whole life running around trying to close deals with the ones who are commitment phobes or who don't want to get married or settle down with anyone. I'm totally opposed to that kind of desperation. And I don't think any self-respecting woman should chase after men to try to pin them down. But I'm also, let it be said loud and clear, very much in favor of women walking out of marriages or relationships, cohabiting relationships, where they are being abused emotionally or physically. I mean, I definitely do not think you should stick around putting up with nonsense just so you don't become a single mother or just so you don't become a single woman, period. However, I think I would like to sort of address maybe younger women who haven't yet made their life choices. And I'd like to say that don't chase men, true. Don't stay in abusive relationships just so you can get married or stay married, true. But, don't set out to have children on your own without a man being deeply involved in the whole arrangement. And by deeply involved, frankly, I mean a man who lives in, and frankly, I actually would say a man to whom you are married. Now, I know this sounds very, very conservative, and I don't mind if I get a barrage of complaints from very, very liberated women who don't regard marriage as necessary and just frankly don't want it. But my own personal view is that bringing children up on your own is not an ideal situation. Now, some of us got saddled with that responsibility against our will. In my case, my ex-husband just decided he'd had enough of the marriage and he walked out. Really, I mean, that's the bottom line. He was not such a bad bloke, but he had a right to decide he did not want the relationship or the marriage anymore. But I think so. I wound up being a single mother against my will. And I have many girlfriends in the same situation who either wound up being single mothers because the man left or because the man behaved so badly they had no choice but to leave or kick him out. And then, of course, there are widows who definitely have no say in the matter. But, I think life is about trying to find the best possible situation if you have a choice. And I would say it is so, so, so hard to bring children up on your own without some man to support you financially, emotionally. And it's particularly difficult if you have male children. Because I think whatever anyone says, boys need their daddies. And of course, you can have situations where despite divorce, both male and female children have regular access to their fathers. But it's still better if the guy is living in the house with them, with the children. And in my opinion, assuming that there's nothing too toxic going on in the relationship. And I'm just always really, really amazed by the number of women who just wake up one day and think, yeah, I think I'll have a child. It's about time. My biological clock is ticking. My eggs are going to go stale if I don't take action now. And they just go ahead and they do it so breezily. And I can tell you, some of them, it's not that they regret the lovely children they wind up having. It's just that they never knew how hard it would be. And even if you're a very successful career woman in your own right and a strong woman with all the emotional and spiritual resources required to single handedly shoulder family responsibilities, it's still better if you have a partner. And so, so as I said, on the one hand, I mean, there are women who that's what they wound up with against their will or through no fault of their own. And they make the best of a situation I think is bad. And many of them also think it's bad, making a virtue out of necessity, if you like, as in, well, at least I don't have some awful man breathing down my neck. I don't have to put up with awful in laws. I can make all the decisions. The children can reflect my values without any complications or interruptions from people who don't share my worldview. There are lots of perfectly good arguments that women who bring children up on their own come up with, whether they chose that situation or not originally. I suppose maybe you can't completely divorce yourself from your background. And I was brought up as a Catholic, and I did go to conservative Catholic schools. So I suppose that Catholic guilt thing will always be there, where I will always regard holy matrimony as the ideal for, child rearing. And I apologize to anybody who's offended by my position, because there are so many wonderful women doing this job on their own, and they don't need to be demoralized or told that they're useless or that they're not doing a good job. But I just personally, from my own personal experience, think it's so much better if you're not sending children to see their dad at weekends only or during school holidays only. In my case, we live in different countries. And so, I just feel that my son, I just feel he would have been better off if we had stayed together. And I really think single motherhood sucks. I think it's to be avoided not at all costs, but I think some of the things that drive couples apart, especially in the modern era, are actually quite trivial. I mean, of course, it depends on how each individual sees it. I mean, what I think is trivial, maybe my ex-husband regards as momentous, or unbearable. But I often tell people that at the point when my ex-husband and myself separated, we were actually had a better relationship than many of the couples I know who stayed the course and are still married now in their 50s and 60s. And so my view is that, kind of honestly, if couples who had bigger problems than we did, infidelity, alcoholism, and all sorts of things, which couples can get over, by the way, I think, if couples who had bigger problems than us could stay together, I wish we had stayed together, and a lot of women quietly tell me that they agree. And the ones that really mystify me are the ones who say, well, me and my ex-husband are really good friends. He's a really cool guy. There's no problem. So you think, well, if there's no problem, why aren't you still together? Why did you put your children through a single motherhood experience when they could have had a fuller, richer, and more stable, emotionally stable experience as children in a two-parent family? Well, so that's just my take. It's something that, I don't blame anybody who disagrees with me, but that is just what I think. I mean, there are places, I once went to Washington, D.C. in the United States, and I was driving around with someone who came from that area, and we passed a district, and he turned around to me and said, do you know that in this part of town, there are streets where no man has lived for like 4 or 5 generations? So I said, well, how did that happen? And my tour guide said, it's because, someone has a child with, or maybe children with one or more different men to whom they're not married and with whom they do not live. And then their children do the same thing. Their daughters do the same thing. And then their granddaughters do the same thing. And then their great granddaughters do the same thing. So there are actually families where there's been no male influence formally or, consistently for several generations. And as awful as men can be, I'm the first one to say that men can be awful. I think we can do better than that for some of our children. And I know that it does affect boys sometimes in a really negative way, to not have that male influence in their lives on a regular basis. When I was kidnapped in 2015, I sat with a bunch of guys who were sort of like career criminals in the den where they kept me in the middle of the creeks. And in the course of chatting to them, because most of them were quite nice, really, would probably not have been criminals if they'd had a better start in life. And I discovered that most of them were brought up by women and no man in sight. So they never had some geezer saying to them, look, you know what? Stop. Am I wrong to think that men are better at disciplining boy children? Could this be a factor in crime rates outside Nigeria as well, in the UK and the US? That is something worth thinking about. And I'd love to hear your views about this, because it's something that, if it doesn't affect you personally, everybody has a friend who is a single mother, either voluntarily or deliberately. So what do you think about this issue? Thank you for listening.